Um Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Shobana from the Institute of Neurosciences, Kolkata. Today, we are going to be doing a very important topic in the intensive care unit, nebulization techniques in the intensive care unit. Dr. Rimita De, who is with us to deliver this lecture, is the chief of the critical care unit in Ruby General Hospital, which is quite a big hospital in Kolkata. And she will be dealing about all the nitty-gritties of what are the drugs, how to deliver the nebulization of these drugs, what would be the techniques, how to troubleshoot, and everything. So let us listen to Dr. Rimita. Let me tell you that if you want to ask any question in between, you can type it in the chat box. We will keep watching the chat box. And later on, if you really want to voice your questions, we can come to that also later. Okay, I think I won't waste more time. Rimita, are you ready? Shall we start?
Yeah. I'll just start sharing my screen. So good afternoon, everybody. So this is a very important topic, I think, from the nursing aspect that is really important in the day-to-day care of our ICU patients. Though we are very much well-versed about it, I would still touch about all the nitty-gritties that are required for the safe nebulization practices in ICU. And howsoever safe and howsoever knowledge we have, actual delivery at the bedside becomes difficult, particularly when it comes to the cleaning and disinfection of the nebulization. That part I would half much. Anyway, to start with, it's taking some time. Okay, so I'll start with the topic, that's nebulization in ICU. So we know that aerosolized medications can greatly benefit critically ill patients with respiratory disorders. Nebulization in ICU can be done in spontaneously breathing patients, in ventilated patients, and patients on oxygen support. These are the list of conditions where actually nebulization in ICU may be required. One of the most frequent causes are the acute attack of asthma and acute exacerbation of the chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases. Acute laryngeal obstruction also may require a nebulization in some cases. Acute and chronic cough or chronic cough exacerbation. Even in pneumonia, we do nebulize patients for symptomatic relief. In ARDS, patients also require nebulization for symptomatic relief, for mobilization of secretions and things like that. And there can be smoke inhalation and associated lung injury. There is a list of other conditions where nebulizations are actually needed, and we continue to do it almost in all patients probably requiring respiratory support. But you see, there are some differences in the spontaneously breathing patients versus mechanically ventilated patients. So both kind of patients may be present in ICU, right? In ICU, we do not get only ventilated patients, or definitely not only spontaneous breathing patients. So spontaneously breathing patients is either sitting or standing, and the drug delivery using mouthpiece or face mask through the upper airway is easier, and breathing is controlled by the patient. But in mechanically ventilated patients, patients will be most of the time in a supine position, and drug delivery is using an artificial airway, and their inspiration and expiration, that is breathing, is actually controlled by the ventilator. So it is very important to coordinate your efforts of nebulization with the breathing efforts of the machine. What all drugs can be delivered in the ventilated patients? They can be beta agonist. We use albuterol, metoprolol, terbutaline. We use anticholinergic drugs, that is ipratropium, the kind of thing that we use in Duolin, right? There can be combination of the beta agonist and the anticholinergic, that is actually Duolin. There can be a combination of long-acting beta agonist and inhaled corticosteroids. There can be corticosteroids per se, There can be prostaglandins. There can be antibiotics like colistin. There can be antiviral and antifungal drugs, and sometimes even heparin can be aerosolized and can be given in a nebulized form. So these are the list of drugs that actually can be delivered. The most of the time we use bronchodilators and corticosteroids, and some of the times we do use antibiotics in by inhalation technique. It is important to remember that drug delivery may be less effective in ventilated patients because of two reasons. Ventilated patients have severe lung disease, and they may actually limit the reach of aerosols to the affected area. And the aerosol deposition is also reduced during ventilation. Despite various evidences on aerosolized medications, nebulizer used with mechanical ventilation is rarely discussed, but you see there are a lot of papers now coming out, and I have tried to substantiate each of the findings that I've given in the slide with some of the evidences in the literature. The goal of nebulization therapy that can be briefly summarized as SHAPE. S is for relief of the spasm, that is to relieve bronchospasm, coughing, and wheezing, that is mainly symptomatic. It can be used to humidify the airway. It can be used as an anti-inflammatory agent to achieve anti-inflammatory effect. It can be used to prevent respiratory complications such as airway inflammation, obstruction, atelectasis, like mobilize the secretion sometimes by nebulization, and promote cough by physiotherapy. So it can be used to prevent respiratory complications, and it can be, and E is to promote expectoration. So that is how we can use nebulization in ICU. Now, first, you see, in a mechanically ventilated patients, what happens is there is a ventilator that blows air with increased oxygen through the tubes to the patient's airways, right? That blows air. And there is an endotracheal tube through the patient's mouth that goes into the windpipe. Okay, and there is some air which blows through the humidifier also. If an active humidifier is placed, there is an air which blows through the humidifier also, which goes to the AT tube. And the exhaled air is flowing away from the patient and goes to the atmosphere. That is how a basic circuit looks like, right? So we know that this is a device which supports ventilation, and a method to, and this device is used to assist or replace spontaneously breathing in very sick patients where their own breathing was not able to compensate for the physiological changes that was occurring in the body in the time of stress, right? So a ventilator assists the patient in such kind of a stress. Now, the characteristics of a good nebulizer system, if you want to understand, is the fast rate of nebulization, implying that the maximum amount of nebulized aerosol is potentially available to patient over any given amount of time. There should be minimum wastage of the aerosol, implying that the maximum amount of aerosol is released or delivered to the patient and is not emitted to the environment. There should be low residual volume, implying that more of the volume fill will be delivered to the patient per aerosol delivery that we are giving. And there should be well-defined droplet size distribution. I'll tell you about the size of the droplets which are actually important for the drug delivery. Now, parameters to be standardized in the use of nebulizer system is the nebulizer type, the choice of the driving gas, whether you can do it with oxygen or by air, the driving gas pressure, the gas flow rate, the drug formulation, nebulizer fill volume that is recommended by the manufacturer definitely, the time of nebulization, the accessories to be done, and the residual volume, that is residual volume is the amount of drug left in the chamber. So all these factors and parameters actually affect nebulization of a patient at a given period of time. So just the basics about how we do it. We first have to clear the secretions from the endotracheal tube. It is quite evident that if the tube is full of secretions, the drug will be interrupted within the way and will not be actually delivered into the terminal bronchioles where it has to be delivered. These drugs actually go to the terminal bronchioles of the lungs and help in relief of the airway obstruction, right? So it is important that we clear out all the secretions from the endotracheal tube. We need to place the drug solution in the medication chamber with optimal fill volume. Usually the optimal fill volume is 4 to 6 ml. That ensures the greatest aerosol generating efficacy of a machine, right? Most of the machines work with this efficacy, and the optimal fill volume is around 4 to 6 ml that we need to see. we need to place the nebulizer in the inspiratory line, right? So if you actually go back, I'll have a slide afterwards. I also have it. Just a second. I'll just tell you. So you see, this is the inspiratory limb. That is how it is there. And this is the expiratory limb, and this is the Y piece. So you need to connect the nebulizer in the inspiratory limb only, because in expiratory limb, of course, you can understand that there will be a lot of drug loss. So you need to connect the nebulizer in the inspiratory limb around 30 centimeters away from the Y piece. That is how it is recommended. That is usually done. Why this is important? Because this acts as a reservoir where in the next inspiration, your patient gets that amount of drug. So there's a minimum drug wastage if you do it like this. You ensure air from around 6 to 8 liters per minute through the nebulizer. And if possible, we decrease the inspiratory flow to less than 60 liters per minute in the ventilator. So a nursing staff is not supposed to decrease the inspiratory flow by her own. Only if it is possible, you ask your doctor to do it. Obtain an optimal tidal volume, that is more than 500 ml in adults whenever possible. But you see, the notion now is 6 cc per kg tidal volume delivery. Only during nebulization you can increase in an attempt to increase the drug delivery, but you need to ask your doctor whether you can do it or not. And your doctor actually needs to do it when you are trying to nebulize. So those things have to be considered. If required, change the ventilator settings, adjust the minute volume, trigger sensitivity and alarms to compensate for the additional flow through the nebulizer. Or else your ventilator alarms will continuously ring on. That is one thing that I always say in ICU, that no alarms should be false alarms. And you need to respond to every alarms present in ICU. That means whenever you are doing a maneuver that changes, that doesn't alarm you, you have to change your alarm settings so that there is no false alarm. But in ICU, if the alarms keep on ringing and you are being habituated to listen to the alarms, you are definitely going to miss the original events. That is out of track to this topic, but it's still very relevant, that you change the ventilator settings and alarm settings accordingly when you want to nebulize. You can turn off flow by continuous or flow mode on the ventilator if it actually creates a problem. Observe nebulizer for adequate aerosol generation throughout its use, right? So you need to see the mist. If there is no mist, probably your nebulization is not working properly. You can tap the nebulizer intermittently during operation until the nebulizer begins to splutter with jet nebulizer. When all medication is nebulized and when there is no aerosol being produced, disconnect the nebulizer from the ventilator circuit. Rinse the nebulizer accessories with sterile water, run dry and store under aseptic conditions. I don't know how frequently it is done in our ICUs. Reconnect the ventilator circuit, HME, and return to the original ventilator and alarm settings. This is how an ideal process has to be done all the time, right? So this is important. Anyway, we'll come to the factors that can affect the drug delivery in a mechanical ventilated patient. It can be the nebulizer itself, it can be the ventilator, it can be the circuit, it can be the patient-related factors, and it can be the drug-related factors as well. Well, key points to remember in ventilator-related factors is volume-controlled ventilation, if possible, should be preferred with low compliance and low resistance, but it doesn't matter, right? So the mode is up to you, it's all right. I think if you can achieve a tidal volume only during nebulization of greater than 500, it can gain a better drug delivery to the patients. Not all patients would require this kind of adjustments. If it is required, you need to ask your doctor to do it. So if the patient has a persistent spasm, very bad COPD, perhaps you can try these maneuvers to increase drug delivery for the patient. But not all patients will require an adjustment in the tidal volume. An inspiratory flow of 30 to 50 liters per minute can be used to deliver bronchodilators in mechanically ventilated patients. And a lower bias flow, sometimes is recommended to increase the drug delivery. I think the circuit-related factors are very important to remember, that where are you placing the nebulizer? It is said that the endotracheal tube with the largest diameter that a patient can safely tolerate should be used. You see, there are two important things here. Because a larger bore of endotracheal tubes will actually allow for a greater drug deposition, will actually minimize the inspissation of secretions and tube block. but it increases the trauma on the tracheal wall, causing a subsequent tracheal necrosis. So we need to weigh and balance between these two factors to choose the size of our ET tube. And by and large, ET tube with the largest diameter that the patient can safely tolerate has to be chosen for the patient. And HME acts as a barrier to aerosol delivery. Hence, HME should be removed before delivering aerosols. That is a must point that has to be remembered. That if you're placing it in the inspiratory limb, but you have an HME in place beyond the Y, then your drug delivery is not proper at all. To maximize the pulmonary deposition of a nebulizer aerosol in a ventilated patient, you operate the nebulizer with an oxygen flow at the rate of around 6 to 8 liters per minute. Okay, so there are some nebulizer related factors as well. There are three different kinds of nebulizer that I will also discuss. But most of the jet nebulizers are less efficient than the ultrasonic and mesh nebulizers. So there are three kinds of nebulizers, that is jet nebulizers, ultrasonic nebulizers, and mesh nebulizers. We mainly use the jet nebulizers, but we know that they are less efficient than the ultrasonic and mesh, and they provide, since they provide higher rate in a shortened time. And placing the nebulizer at a distance of 30 centimeter or more from the Y improves aerosol delivery compared with placing between the Y piece and the endotracheal tube, because this place acts as a spacer in which the aerosol accumulates between the breaths. So in the next breath, the patient gets a better delivery of the drug. So that is important, that you place at least beyond 30 centimeter from the Y. So I told you what are the different types of nebulizer. They are the jet nebulizers, the ultrasonic nebulizers, and the vibrating mesh nebulizers, where they are mainly differentiated on the mechanism of the aerosol generation, the residual volume, and the ergonomics, basically. Medication restriction is less in all the three. Anyway, I'll just tell you, in jet nebulizer, the aerosol generation is by compressed air and Venturi effect, and there's a larger volume of drugs that actually remains left over after the nebulization process has been complete. So the residual volume is large. You can use any medication through these jet nebulizers, but you see the ergonomics says that there is a need of compressed gas. It is loud, it is though disposable, and it has a potential interference with the ventilator. I mean, if you increase the flow rate suddenly, your ventilator cannot match the rate, so it gives you a continuous alarm when the patient is on nebulizer. If you have noticed, you will understand that if you place a circuit of nebulizer, then you have to adjust for the flow rate in the ventilator, otherwise it keeps on alarming. So there is a potential interference with the ventilator. What happens in ultrasonic nebulizer? There is a high frequency drug solution agitated by the piezoelectric crystal. So the mechanism of aerosol generation is different. There is some amount of residual volume which is larger than the mesh one, but definitely it is less than the jet nebulizer. And extremely drug sensitive drugs, heat sensitive drugs actually cannot be given by ultrasonic nebulizer. They're a bit bulky, but they're silent. There is a need for decontamination, but there is no interference with the ventilator. And vibrating mesh nebulizer uses high frequency mesh vibrations, pumping the drug solution through trapped holes. Here the residual volume is very low, but highly concentrated or viscous solutions cannot be given by the nebulizer. So some drug delivery can be actually obstructed. But the most of the bronchodilators that we give can actually be given by the vibrating mesh nebulizer. They are portable, small in size, silent and disposable, and there is no interference with the ventilator. So by and large, the ultrasonic and the vibrating mesh nebulizer are more ideal than the usual jet nebulizer that we are using. How to do it? So there can be whether to do it. So if a patient has a bronchospasm, continuous versus intermittent nebulization, which gives you a better drug delivery. It says that intermittent nebulization decreases aerosol loss during exhalation, and it is so more efficient than the continuous nebulization in the aerosol delivery. So intermittent are actually more efficient than continuous nebulization, as it minimizes the aerosol loss during exhalation, right? So this needs to be taken care of if a patient has a refractory spasm. So you need to give a gap and then to start the nebulizations again. And this is about the drug size, right? So if the drug size increases, as the drug size increases, the total drug deposition actually decreases. Not only that, the drug deposition in the alveolus, bronchus, and the alveolus and the bronchus decreases, and extrathoracic drug deposition increases. What does that mean? That means that as the particle size of the drugs that we are giving increases, there is more deposition of the drugs in the endotracheal tube rather than in the alveoli and the bronchus where we need. So we need drug deposition in the alveolus. See, this dotted line is for the alveolus, and this is for the bronchus, and this is for the extrathoracic, and this is the total drug deposition. So if the particle size is around 5 microns, there is optimal drug deposition everywhere. Most of the alveolar drug deposition is possible when the particle size is around 2 microns, right? Even up to 5 microns, there is some deposition in the alveoli as well as in the bronchus. But as the particle size exceeds 5 microns, most of the drugs are getting deposited in the extrathoracic region. That means they are remaining in the endotracheal tube rather than being deposited in the terminal bronchioles or the alveolus where we need. So that is the property of the drugs that we are using. Okay, so this is very important, that the residual volume is important depending on the type of nebulizer used. And we need to take care of the fill volume. I told you most of the jet nebulizers, the fill volume is around 4 to 6 ml. So jet nebulizer have a greater residual volume and hence will require a greater fill volume compared to other nebulizer. Okay. What can we use oxygen for nebulization in patients? Delivering oxygen to patients requiring nebulized bronchodilator therapy. It's said that oxygen should only be used in hypoxemic patients. If the patient is not hypoxemic, you may not use oxygen in them. In patients with acute severe asthma, oxygen should be used as a driving gas for delivering nebulized bronchodilators at a flow rate of around 6 to 8 liters whenever possible. So if available cylinders do not produce this flow rate, compressed air from the nebulizer should be used along with supplemental nasal cannula. So that is important, that you have to provide the usual oxygen delivery to the patient during nebulization as well. And the patient should be changed back to his or her own usual mask when the nebulization therapy is complete. So you can use oxygen at 6 to 8 liters, but be careful not to overuse oxygen and not to keep the patient hypoxic during nebulization, right? We know these factors, but we tend to forget them. So what happens if the patient is on cannula, you put a nebulizer mask, you forget that the cannula was on, and we need to keep on that cannula when the nebulizer is on. So those factors have to be taken care in mind. In patients with COPD, there is an additional risk factor for what is called as a hypercapnic respiratory failure, and in general, nebulizing with oxygen should be avoided in this patient. When oxygen-driven nebulizer is given to a patient of COPD, there is a risk of hypercapnia and acidosis, and the nebulizer should be driven by compressed air, and if necessary, supplemental oxygen should be given concurrently by nasal cannula, right? So avoid giving very high flow oxygen in these patients because they lose their respiratory drive if you give them more oxygen. And the arterial blood gases should be checked 30 to 60 minutes later to ensure satisfactory oxygenation without carbon dioxide retention or acidosis. Your doctors will definitely help you in choosing this out. And you see, this is also important that after treatment, nebulizers used in ventilatory circuits, when left permanently in line, can become contaminated with high level of nosocomial pathogens and may generate bacterial aerosols, right? So you are nebulizing a patient to actually decrease his secretions, but if you leave it on place, it gets filled up with bacteria, and whatever you nebulize is actually full of bacteria, right? And natural host defenses are passed, and bacterial aerosols can directly reach the lower respiratory tract. So just understand this, right? What is happening if you are not cleaning the nebulizer adequately. Okay, so precautions during nebulizer: if the patient is able to have a good posture, sit upright and hold the medication cup tight, cup uprightly, comfortably, and this ensures maximum drug delivery and effective nebulization. This is like this. if it is possible in a spontaneously breathing patient. Breathing deep and holding the breath whenever possible facilitates better lung distribution, right? So if possible, we can ask our patients to cooperate us on that and stop the nebulizer if the patient needs to cough or take out phlegm, right? This prevents the wasting of medications and unwanted skin and eye exposures, right? So there actually Duolin also has its effect on the eyes, and there can be pupillary mydriasis due to anticholinergic effect of the drug. So if possible, we need to we need to disconnect if the patient does not need is in a need to cough or take out phlegm. Occasional tapping of the medication chamber is important. It helps to bring down bigger droplets sticking to the walls, increasing the availability of the drug for nebulizer. So you can keep on occasionally doing this. This is very, 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 very important, that precautions post nebulizer. I mean, I think in today's lecture, I know whatever I have spoken till now is being followed, or most of you are aware of that being followed, but I do not know this. We need to actually rationalize in our ICU that post nebulization, how to clean the nebulizer accessories. So clean with water, mild detergent after every use. You disinfect with 70% isopropyl alcohol or hydrogen peroxide after every use. Your institution should have a good cleaning protocol for nebulizers as well. And you rinse and you have to rinse with sterile water, and you have to clean and dry the area after every use. So hospital grade cleaning and disinfecting agents are recommended for all horizontal and frequently touched surfaces. Visibly dirty surfaces should first be cleaned with a detergent, and then with a disinfectant should be applied. After contact time has passed, disinfectant may be rinsed. The 70% alcohol or sodium hypochlorite, whatever is important, has to be given. Specifically for the care of nebulizers, the nebulizer should be cleaned daily in regular usage and after each use in intermittent use. The mask, mouthpiece, and the chamber should be disconnected, disassembled, and washed in a warm detergent and water solution. I do not know whether it is practical for every use in the patient, but at least if it can be done once in a day, at least that is a practical target that can actually be helpful for your patients. And the components should be left to dry overnight. Before use, the nebulizer should run for a few seconds, should run without medicines for a few seconds, and then you add medications. That actually helps to blow away any of the dried pieces, the dried particles of detergent or other thing that can harm your patient, right? Disposable components such as mouthpiece, mask, tubing, and nebulizer chamber should be changed every 3 to 4 months, and the compressors require annual servicing by the manufacturer or by the local service provider. And failure to do this can definitely result in nosocomial pneumonia. Ensure that there is no medication remaining in the device. Remove the nebulizer unit from the T-piece. Remove the filler cap from the nebulizer unit. Clean all parts with warm water and mild detergent in accordance with the hospital protocols. Rinse parts with sterile water. Shake off excess of the water from all parts and allow to fully dry. Actually, this is more simply spoken than can be done easily, because practically every patient probably gets at least 4 to 6 nebulizations, and there can be around I think 7 to 8 patients in a 10-bedded ICU who are requiring nebulizer. So it's a huge huge task on the nursing staff or anybody who is designated for for the infection control purposes. And it is important to understand that cleaning of the nebulizers are also very important part of to prevent hospital-acquired infection or nosocomial infection. So we need to concentrate more on this and how practical it is feasible. That is the question that that we need to discuss in each of our units, right? Disinfection of the nebulizer accessories. Ensure that there is no medication remaining in the device. Remove nebulizer unit from the T-piece. Remove filler cap from the nebulizer unit. Clean all parts with warm water and mild liquid detergent. And completely immerse parts in appropriate disinfecting agents in accordance with the hospital protocols and the manufacturer's guidelines, right? So you see, it has been shown that if you are not adequately cleaning, both fungal and the bacterial colonization increases in the respiratory accessories, right? Whatever respiratory accessories, you are using mask and things like that, the colonization increases. And you can understand that when you are nebulizing with this fungus or bacteria on the mask, right? So what harm it can do to the patient. Okay, so this is about the cleaning of the nebulizers. And in COVID times, I thought I would give a special touch to what are considered as the aerosol generating procedure. As per the CDC guidance, the following procedures should be considered as aerosol generation due to creation of the uncontrolled respiratory secretions. They are saying open suctioning of the airways, sputum induction, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, endotracheal intubation and extubation, NIV, bronchoscopy, and manual ventilation. And the other ones, they are saying there are limited data on whether other procedures may generate an infectious aerosols and represent a transmission risk. Here, they are putting nebulizer as an intermittent risk of aerosol generation, right? So that is what the CDC stands these days. I thought I would touch this topic because in the pandemic, it is important to understand what harm it can do to us as well as a healthcare practitioner. So who are at risk? Of course, the doctors and paramedics staff and non-infected bystander, people in the vicinity, or if the persons are getting home nebulization, they can be affected, right? So what are the do's and don'ts? Do perform nebulization in an airborne infection isolation room, or what is called as a negative pressure rooms whenever feasible. Do protect the ventilators by high efficiency viral bacterial filters that I think we are all following now. Place the nebulizer in the inspiratory line at least 30 centimeters from the patients and ensure airflow around 6 to 8 liters per minute. If you are suspicious of the infectivity of the patient, then use PPE and safe accessories, whatever is required. And you can use oxygen as a driving gas at the rate of 6 liters per minute. If the patient is suffering from acute severe asthma, but in COPD, you have to be a bit concerned about using high oxygen support. I would rather suggest not to use it and to give the oxygen support as required by the patient by another device, and use nebulizer, whatever is used for bronchodilator purposes. Don't follow continuous nebulizer. Intermittent nebulization, that is only during inspiration, is more efficient. Restrict entry and exit of healthcare workers to ICU to a minimum. Don't reuse the equipments, and disinfect them as regularly as possible. Don't disconnect humidifier while placing the nebulizer. Don't leave the ICU without cleaning and disinfecting the high-touch surfaces. That is important. Okay. Having said that, most of the other guidelines consider nebulization to have a high risk potential. But you see, there are controversies regarding that. So the recommendations to follow droplet and contact precautions are there. And if possible, if you can choose over MDI. So if bronchodilators are indicated, MDI with spacer or a dried powder inhaler should be preferred over the nebulizer. But this is what the British Thoracic Society guidelines says, that the nebulizer droplets are not actually viral droplets. These droplets are from the machine, that is liquid bronchodilator drug particles, and not from the patient. And that is why nebulization may not be considered as a viral aerosol generating procedure. So again, they are quite the Ministry of Health, Family Welfare and Government of India says that the aerosol generating procedure are open suctioning of the respiratory tract, intubation, bronchoscopy, and cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I'm not sure about the nebulization where Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in India where they are placing the nebulizations as to. They are saying that there is insufficient evidence to classify nebulizer therapy as an aerosol generating procedure that is associated with the transmission of viral infections. The WHO in the clinical management of SARI infections, that is severe acute respiratory infections, the WHO has actually given a guideline. WHO continues to recommend airborne precautions for circumstances and settings in which aerosol generating procedure and support treatment are performed according to the risk assessment. So that is what they are saying. And they have also said that administration of nebulized treatment, WHO considers it as an aerosol generating procedure. So there are controversies regarding that. Now, I just wanted to bring up the controversies and just to say that if possible, if you can avoid nebulizations by an MDI wherever it is clinically feasible. And if you are to give nebulizations to any patient who you think of a potential infectious risk, use PPI as far as possible. Okay. So this is again by another society, the ESAM Society. And they also said that medical aerosols produced by inhalers and nebulizers do not contain pathogens, right? So medical aerosols from nebulization derive from a non-patient source, that is the fluid in the nebulizer chamber, and they do not carry the viral particles, right? But when the nebulizer is contaminated, then the aerosol emitting from it may contain virus, right? So that is what they are saying. And the recommendations are during pandemic, treat every patient as potentially infected because asymptomatic patient can shed the virus. Use PPE for aerosol and droplet infection. Of course, wash hands and put on gloves, use proper aseptic technique. Perform high-risk aerosol genetic procedure, preferably in a negative pressure room if it is available. I do not know that, I do understand that a lot of us do not have that infrastructure where such high volume of patients can actually be provided within a negative pressure isolation rooms. Right, so take the precautions as much as possible. Well, ISC guidelines, this is the Indian Chest Society, they have given guidance for nebulization during the COVID-19 pandemic. They have given the nebulizers, regarding the nebulizer at home and also in hospital. They have said that people who can benefit from using a nebulizer at home include people with severe disease and those who are unable to inhale as deeply and quickly as desired to use some inhaler devices. Old people with a lot of comorbidities and lot of disabilities that make it difficult to use an inhaler. People who have a trouble or cannot handle the inhaler device, and people who require medicines that are only accessible by nebulizer solutions or suspensions. This is the nebulization technique at home. I won't touch upon this as much because this is in great detail. But for in-hospital settings for COVID-19, the Indian Chest Society says that healthcare workers should observe complete precautions like face mask, eye protection, gloves and gown. Maintain a safe distance that is 6 feet if possible. Limit the healthcare personnel entry in the room. In case filters are used, ensure that filters are removed well in time after nebulization and replace it with fresh ones in case there is a surge in the expiratory resistance. Close the patient's door. Proper disposal of equipment is necessary. A fresh mask, mouthpiece, and tubing should be preferred for each nebulization. That is what they say. I mean, that is really difficult and probably not practical to follow. And the patients need not be transferred to higher level facilities just for the need of nebulization. Right. So they say that surgical mask you should keep on the face of the infected patients if the patient is on HFNC. Use mesh nebulizers if available. Avoid the use of jet nebulizers and place a mesh nebulization prior to humidifier to improve the efficiency of the treatment and to reduce the retrograde contamination from the patient, and attach HEPA filter, right? So that is important to prevent the transmission of infectious droplet nuclei through the ventilators. They say that do not combine, this is for the pandemic only, do not combine aerosol therapy with pulmonary clearance techniques. Use inline closed system suction catheters wherever possible in intubated patients. And healthcare workers definitely should wear PPI, cleaning hands before and after treatment with soap and water or an alcohol-based sanitizer is important. And definitely all non-essential persons should not enter into the room, and disinfect equipment with 70% isopropanol and hydrogen peroxide. So in summary, this is what we said, that the key good practices for optimal antibiotic nebulization during mechanical ventilation is use an SOP, right? So you can create actually an SOP for nebulization. Ensure adequate staff training. Definitely that has to be given. For nebulizers, use nebulizers with small residual volume. Do not operate jet nebulizer with gas external to the ventilator. Use solutions for inhalation. Position the nebulizer upstream in inspiratory limb at 15 to 40 centimeter of the white piece. Remove HME during nebulization. If it is a heated humidifier or this is an active humidifier, then you consider switching off or use of a dry circuit. You can do some ventilatory settings if feasible, change in the ventilatory settings if feasible for a patient, and place a new filter between the expiratory limb and the ventilator for each nebulization. Monitor patient closely during nebulizations, particularly in regard to the airway pressure, arterial pressure, and oxygen saturation. Check for the resumption of humidification at the end of the nebulization. So that was my talk about, right? So I would just stop sharing, and I would be open for questions now.
Very exhaustive and thoroughly covered topic, Dr. Imita. I think two people raised their hands. I asked them to put their question in the chat, but I don't think anybody has typed their question. So I think we can allow them to ask question directly. Neil,
Sure.
Neil, can we ask them to ask?
Yes, ma'am. Just telling them to raise their hand. If
I think
anybody has a question, they can please raise their hand. We will ask to unmute and speak.
I think Ajay Devnath had raised his hand. There was another person, and I think Nagmani had also raised.
At times it is just that they raise their hand by mistake. But if anyone has any questions right now, if they can raise their hand, we shall take the questions by unmuting them.
While we are waiting, Dr. Imita, I think we all agree that it is just like the procedure of nebulization is like any invasive procedure in an intensive care unit. Like you would not intubate or ventilate, or you would not put a central line until and unless there is a definite indication. So putting the patient on for a nebulization therapy is also similar to that. We should be extra careful. Not, it should not be just like adding nebulization Budicort and Duolin to each and every person.
Each and every patient.
That is to be avoided. There has to be a definite indication for a bronchodilator or an anti-inflammatory drug. There has to be a definite indication for an antibiotic nebulizer as well, because we all know that the correct amount of drug, the antibiotic which is delivered to the distal airways, is really very, very minute compared to the systemic administration. So we should, and it leads to a lot of hazards, exposing the patient to more VAPs and HAPs, and loss of the drug, as well as adding to the cost of the ITU stay. So I think we should be very careful. So, and whenever anything is done, even a nebulizer is not just like switching on and off. Extra care has to be taken, just like any invasive procedure. This is also of paramount importance. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask? Any technique, anything which you think?
I would just second it, Shobnali, that nebulizers are frequently, I would say, overused, right? So
absolutely.
Who comes with a respiratory distress for any reason. So if the patient is in pulmonary edema, perhaps a bit of furosemide would do more good than nebulizing him. But, a thorough judgment is required whether nebulizers are actually required or not. We need to understand, like, yes, that it is like any other drug which has its own side effect as well, right? So it has to be potentially weighted against, the risk have to be weighted against the benefits that we will get from the process right at that moment. So I would definitely like to second that.
Seems like everybody is satisfied and they have learned enough. Probably the festive mood is around, I think.
I think so. The festive mood is down, but still, I will still be there if you have any questions or any comments.
just for discussion's sake, since we have time, what about colistin nebulizations or tobramycin nebulizations?
Yeah.
At the drop of a hat, people want to use colistin and tobramycin, but we all know that the formulations don't really support this kind of drug delivery to the distal airways. So what would be your take on it?
Yes, I personally I'm not a great fan of colistin or tobramycin nebulizations for two reasons. That is one thing, that the preparation and administration has to be really quick and fast in terms of antibiotics.
Absolutely.
Because we know that the colistin particularly is a prodrug, and it deactivates very soon.
Right.
If it's not administered very quickly, right? So I mean, that is almost not all the time in my control, because you see, a sister prepares a colistin nebulization for nebulizing the patient, and in our ICUs, when sometimes one sister have one or more than one allocations. Usually they have allocations, and the other patients go bad. She runs for that patient, and she forgets to deliver colistin.
Right.
That drug can cause more harm to the patient. That is one thing. Second thing, we use more of jet nebulizers and not of the ultrasound and the mesh.
Right.
So I am really very concerned about the drug deposition that actually occurs during antibiotic nebulizations. And even if they are administered, I mean, you rightly told that these are the IV formulations that we are trying to nebulize. I really do not know whether it can actually it can actually be absorbed by the endothelium to have its effect on the organisms. So those three things, for those three things, I'm not a great fan of antibiotic nebulizations.
That is what I was trying to drive home, because this, even, the good nursing staff can take it up with their attending doctor.
Yes.
That instead of nebulization, some other technique has to be adopted, some other drug or some other modality of treatment needs to be adopted, because to my mind, none of these antibiotic, especially the colistin ones, I don't think they really are, most of the brands are not optimum for nebulization purposes.
Yes.
And we find patients actually deteriorating after being put on colistin nebulizations, and they probably get the alveolar damage because of the drug itself, and we probably land up thinking they are having a super added infection, fungal, that, this and the other. So this needs to be really harped upon. Somebody's asked a question: can you tell me which nebulization will be better for COVID patients? I think he wants to know about the drug.
Yeah, I will tell you, there are few studies which has shown that steroid nebulizations can actually have some symptomatic benefit on cough in COVID patients. So in a recovering COVID patients, or who is very symptomatic about cough, sometimes steroid nebulizations or steroid inhalers are being used on the COVID patients. But again, by and large, the indication of the nebulizations remains same. If there is refractory bronchospasm, which is not being controlled by any other drug, we can use nebulizations. But as far as the drug is concerned, probably steroids and not any other drug which has specifically been shown to be effective in COVID. Even steroids have been shown in certain anecdotal studies, and most of the guidelines, though, use IV steroids in patients requiring them.